Support for Radio Friends comes from OsteoStrong. Improvements in bone density, strength, and power can be achieved by weekly 5-minute no-sweat sessions on their 4-Spectrum machines. These isometric robotic machines safely emulate high-impact loading on different parts of the skeletal system, which stimulates activity in bone-building cells. Balance and agility can be improved by 2-minute sessions on vibration plates. Every session is supervised by a trained coach. Learn more on Facebook or call to set up a complimentary wellness assessment and session. Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Thursday, September the 22nd. It's good to have you with us. And my friend Walter Bargen is sitting here. Of course, you know Walter was the first poet laureate for the state of Missouri. That was how many years ago, Walter?
That was 2008, 2009, and it trickled over into 2010.
Okay, so it trickled for 3 years as a poet laureate for the state of Missouri.
Really just 2, but you know.
Yeah, okay. And you've written numerous poems since then.
Yes. Well, I have a total of 25 books now.
Yeah, that's a lot. But, you know, whenever Walter's on, many times we talk about snakes, and he's written poems about snakes. Today, he walked in and said, we're not going to talk about snakes. I want to talk about ticks. Ticks. Now, if you live here in central Missouri, you go out into the woods, you know what ticks are. And in the summertime, I am covered with ticks almost daily and pull them off. You had a different experience. You were covered with them that you ended up in the hospital.
That is what happened to me, yes. And for at least 15 years now, almost every year, I have gotten at least 100 tick bites.
Yeah.
And I've never gotten ill from any of them. A couple of them maybe got a little bit infected, but I do some special things to them, like I put Epsom salts on them and things like that when they get infected, and that seems to be helpful. But this time, I didn't even know I was ill. I went into shall I read this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
So he's written a poem or a story about the experience of ticks. And listen close, because this is serious stuff. You don't want to take it lightly.
If you do take it lightly, you will probably be dead.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
Just share the story.
Yes, I did fall off the end of the world, or at least the end of the week. And that's why you haven't heard from me. I was in the hospital for 5 days. I went in for a COVID test believing that I clearly had the symptoms, runny nose, slight fever, but my doctor said no at 4 p.m. on a Friday and kicked me out without a COVID test. On Saturday, feeling worse, temperature rising, without the sun obliging, and there was no can involved. I hope you recognize that song. I go to Quick Care at Hy-Vee, the grocery store, where the young ladies are very kind and amazed at how low my blood pressure is, 100/50. And they look at me and say, "Are you sure it's safe for you to drive?" And I said, "Well, I drove here. I live about 15 miles away. I feel like I can drive home." So I did drive home. They actually checked my blood pressure twice to make sure that their reading was correct. And of course, my GP, my doctor, turned out to be right. I did not have COVID, but I wouldn't find that out until around midnight in the emergency room in the hospital, because I had no recall of how I got to the emergency room. My wife drove me there. I went there because I reached the point where I could not form sentences any longer, which usually means a stroke. And they took me in there and they rushed me into an MRI to see if there was any brain damage. There was no brain damage. You know, they had taken a blood sample and they were testing that. And they come back and say, "You don't have COVID." The doctor was right. But you have ehrlichiosis, which is a tick-borne disease. And I don't know how long I had that tick-borne disease, because when they looked at my blood, they found that I had almost no white blood cells left. My red blood cells, they said, were shredded, which meant that they were very ineffective at carrying oxygen into my body. But they're still asking me questions. Prior to the results of the blood test, they're asking me questions. They ask me, "What year do you live in?" And I look at them, and I'm probably this blank stare. I can't figure out what they mean. What does it mean to live in a year? But I don't have the words to actually ask any questions. And finally, I blurt out 1922. And they look at me, and they look at each other. And I'm assuming that they want to know who the president is. And I go, Warren Harding. So, obviously I am not firing on many pistons at this point.
Yeah.
So they send me into the for an MRI to check for brain damage, and this is my experience in the MRI. So I'm now a hospital inmate caged in a machine that was obviously developed by a 1950s KGB agent for torture called an MRI. The bells of hell are ringing in my ears. My head is stuck in the largest foghorn on the largest ship ever built as the screaming of twisting metal is wrapped around my head and the banging of what I find out was magnets. The young doctor is worried that I have suffered brain damage from a stroke. They have no evidence, though, as of yet. It's clear that I have, but now, once the blood test is in, I have a tick-borne disease. I'm given an antibiotic, doxycycline. After a day and a half, the brain swelling, which is what was impeding my speech, was moderated, and I was pretty much back to normal.
So this happened because you were bitten by a tick. You ended up in the hospital. You really don't remember much of it. But the point is that many of us don't really take these ticks seriously, but they can land us in the hospital.
Well, I've heard of so many people who maybe not that many people, but who live in town. They get bitten by a tick. It's like they get one tick they've been bitten by, and they get a tick disease. So, it's like here I am 15 years into this crazy epidemic of ticks, getting bitten over 100 times a year, never getting a tick disease.
I haven't either.
And I think I've got some type of immunity. I don't know how that's possible.
But now you've got me thinking, because I don't know how many ticks I pull off of myself every summer, and I have not, knock on wood, I've not had a disease. I hope you don't put a jinx on me there, Walter. But Google it, look it up, and find out what the symptoms are if you have been bitten by a tick and if you need to see a doctor or not. But Walter, we're out of time here.
Well, I did remember the word for the brain swelling. It's encephalopathy.
Encephalopathy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's our word for today. Encephalopathy. Thank you so much for joining us.
And ehrlichiosis.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Walter. We're out of time.
My
Bye-bye.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.